Hello and welcome to all you golf nuts, nerds, and listeners out there. This is the Golfing Greenkeeper podcast. As always, I'm Steve Smith, your host. Welcome to episode number 14. Now, it's been a few weeks since the last podcast, and I'm starting to feel a bit of a sense of relief. Where I'm located on the northern beaches of Sydney. We've been lifted from our lockdown scenario and we're able to get out there and smell the fresh air. I've been fortunate to be able to play a couple of games of golf as well. We've had some beautiful weather, some punching Australian heat. And what more could you want to do than get out there and enjoy some of the beautiful sunshine that we have in Australia and enjoy a round of 18 holes, 9 holes, whatever number of holes you like. It has been sensational. Now, a quick understanding and a wrap of what's going on in this episode. We start off, as always, with walking the fairways, and I've got a bit of news coming out of Tasmania, which I did tease you about last episode, that there's a new golf course that's coming out, and I've got some info on that. Some other parts of golf on the East Coast into South Australia as well, up into Queensland. And also, today, for the first time, going to have a conversation with special guest, golf author and publisher, the one and only Paul Daley. Come along, guys, for the ride. Let's start with walking the fairways. Now, I must tell you that it is bloody beautiful to get out and walk the fairways in the beautiful Australian summer. And I'm sure there's plenty of you out there enjoying it. But on this Walking the Fairways, we start off with some amazing news coming out of Tasmania, like I mentioned, and that is of a new golf course that's very soon to start construction, now that all the approvals from council have gone through, and that is going to be called 7 Mile Beach Golf Course. And it's in Hobart, Tasmania. Now, the man behind this incredible project is an Australian touring professional golfer by the name of Matt Goggin. Now, you might have heard of Matt Goggin in years gone by, and seen him on the tour. I've seen him play in the States. We've probably known him for a number of years playing the Australian tour as well. And Matt was a well-known golfer in Australia. Now, Matt is the man himself behind this project, and he is a Tasmanian. And that is probably a little bit where there's a little bit of, I won't say a little bit, there's a lot of personal passion behind this project. As Matt's a Tasmanian, he's a local to the area and grew up in Hobart. Now, I had the opportunity to have a chat with Matt just the other day on the phone about this project, just after the announcement was made that the architects that were appointed for the project was Clayton de Vries Pont. And they've been engaged to do the design and oversee the construction of this golf course. Now, like I said, I had a chance to chat with Matt, and I was very, very thankful that I was able to catch up with Matt on the phone about it. He's over in the States, and just really, really interesting and absolutely impressive, I've got to tell you, just to hear some of the background of how this has come about. Now, if you've been in the golf game, and I've talked about this before, these projects do not happen in a hurry. This doesn't take 2 years. It doesn't take 5 years. Some of these things take 10 years plus to get to this point. And Matt has been through this long process. And some of you out there have heard about this project before, and where it sort of got up ready to sort of really get going. It was announced that, things were happening and it was looking like it was going to be started soon. And then all of a sudden it would sort of go quiet again. That's the life cycle of going through the process of trying to get a golf course built. And it is, like I said, it's a very, very long exercise. And this one for Matt, it's his passion behind it, and having a chat with him, just hearing it in his voice and what he's wanting to bring to his hometown, to his home state of Hobart in Tasmania, and this particular piece of land is really something special to Matt's heart. And it's taken a long time, and there's a whole lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it. And I'm sure there's no doubt a lot of dollar signs behind it too. And that is part of the process. But this is going to be one to watch, and something that I'm hoping to share a fair bit with you along the way as we go. And to give you an idea of just where we're talking about, it's not too far from, now I don't know if you know the area of Hobart very well in Tasmania. I don't personally, haven't been there, but I've been looking on maps and Google Earth and trying to understand where it's located and where it's going to be positioned. Now, it's not that far from Tasmania Golf Club and Royal Hobart Golf Club and the lesser known Lanherne Golf Club. And they're all located around Hobart Airport itself. Now, where Royal Hobart Golf Club is on the western side of Hobart Airport, 7 Mile Beach Golf Course is on the eastern side of Hobart Airport. Just stick with me and try and follow as I try and describe to you where this is going to be positioned. Now, the eastern side of the airport is this magnificent finger of sand. If you look at it on a map, if you look at it on Google Earth, go there and it's going to be hard if you try and type in 7 Mile Beach because you come up with all sorts of places all over the planet. So type in Hobart Airport and you'll zoom in and you'll find 7 Mile Beach pretty quickly, right? But it's this magnificent finger of sand. This particular space where the golf course is going to be built is just been let go. It's just been left. And there's a lot of reasons over the years as to why that's happened, but it has happened. And Matt Goggin knows this area, knows it very, very well. And he's sort of been going through this process, like I said, for a long time. So this space is, I don't even know. It's really hard to describe in its raw terms. Just the beautiful dunes, the way that it's been left. You can bring out this landscape, and what the guys will be able to do is bring out a golf course in this landscape. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be incredible, is what it's going to be. So on this finger of sand. It's got vegetation all over it, grasses and trees and bits and pieces, lots of weeds as well. But on the north side, so it runs east-west, on the north side of the finger of sand is 5 Mile Beach. And then on the south side, well, you guessed it, that's 7 Mile Beach itself. And that's the main beach of what is Tiger Head Bay, which faces straight south, next stop Antarctica, if you don't mind. That's sort of what we're looking at. So I can just picture this golf course and the elements affecting the way that you'll be able to play it once it's come to fruition and people are out there and able to enjoy it and experience it in different times of the year. So we've got the Barnbugles of the world up in the north end of Tassie along Bass Strait. But this is down in Hobart, like I said, facing open south. It's going to be quite a different experience, I dare suggest. And look, it's, like I said, go, if you do what I do, I just love this sort of stuff on maps. Go and have a look on the map to find out where this 7 Mile Beach is and give you an idea of just how it's going to be sitting in position. Now, if you haven't heard, I mentioned Clayton de Vries Pont. If you haven't heard of Clayton de Vries Pont as an architecture firm before, let me show you a little bit of who they are. One of them is Mike Clayton, which you probably have heard of. In years gone by, he's been part of OCCM, which is a well-known firm that we know of in Australia. But Mike Clayton himself is an Australian golf course architect who's well-known. And he's worked with Tom's Oak, one of the more well-known courses of the country. He worked with Tom's Oak, and these two produced Barnbugle Dunes, which is the one I just mentioned, at the north end of Tasmania. Now, it's probably somewhere that you've heard of. And they've also done work. Mike Clayton's also done work in a number of other remodel courses around the country with OCCM and a couple of them around through Asia and the like as well. Mike de Vries, that's the second name in Clayton de Vries Pont, is Mike de Vries. Now, he is a well-known American-based architect of the firm, and he was one of the men behind a course called Cape Wickham, which you might have heard of on King Island. And that's at the top of nearly at the top of the tree on all of our rankings that you hear about is the new Cape Wickham course. I say new because it's still considered new by many, and that's something that I'm sure we've all heard about as golfers looking at where we can play and bucket list courses of this country of ours. Now, the third name in that list is Frank Pont. Now, that's someone that we probably haven't heard of much in Australia. He hasn't done any work down here as such, but he's the European-based architect of this trio, and he's in Holland. Right, so you've got Mike Clayton based in Australia, Mike de Vries based in the States, and Frank Pont based in Europe. So that's the trio of Clayton de Vries Pont. Now, to say that these guys are well-versed in designing great golf courses is probably immensely understating it. I think that what Matt Goggin's done here by announcing this trio and this design firm as the brains behind the design for this golf course is, I would consider, an absolute stroke of genius. You've got people that know this area intimately, and obviously having someone like Mike Clayton, who's based in Australia and is a wonderful golf mind, and some people love listening to what he's got to say, and some people will object to a few things in the way he speaks. But he's got a pretty strong sense of the way that he sees golf and golf courses. I got to agree. I got to tell you, I agree with a lot of it, to be honest. Yeah, I can't wait to see a map. I really want to see a map. And if you go onto their socials, if you go to the 7 Mile Beach social media pages on Instagram, for example, and it's the number 7 Mile Golf. So 7 Mile Golf is a 7 Mile Beach golf course. So Instagram page, you'll see there's a couple of little snippets that Matty Goggins put up of the plans there that you can see. A couple of little snippets of the holes, and I just want to see more. I really want to see the whole thing for myself. But until that's released, we're just teased with it. And Matt's just put a couple of things out there for us to wet the whistle, to keep our tongues wagging. And having Clayton DeVries Point, like I said, I think we're going to get something super duper special, and a bit like where Barnbugle landed, a bit like where Cape Wickham landed on our best courses in the country. I've got absolutely no doubt, and certainly in looking at this location, I've got no doubt that this is going to land at the top of the list. And I think it's something to get ridiculously excited about. I am, and you can probably tell it in my voice. I just can't wait for this to start, let alone to see it finished. So it has been a long time coming, but it is now at a point where they're soon to start. And chatting with Matt, I'm sure it's been a very, very long road, and I'm sure he's more excited than anyone could possibly imagine. So it's soon to start happening, guys, and I'll keep you up to date with it. And, look, if you look at what Tasmania's already got in terms of great golf courses, 7 Mile Beach Golf Course, and of course, don't forget, I mentioned not long ago, the other new Hobart golf course, which is Arm End Golf Course, which is going to be done by Crafter and Mogford of Golf Strategies in Tassie, is really throwing up something special that's going to stamp Tasmania on the map as one of the must-visit golf destinations in Australia. And I think we probably all thought that Barnbugle, when they put the first one down, the Dunes, Barnbugle Dunes was a destination and bringing people to the state of Tassie. And then they went and, built the Lost Farm, and then you hear about, so it's a 36-hole incredible facility. Then you have the King Island courses of Cape Wickham and Ocean Dunes pop up. And, like I said, these things don't happen on a whim. There's a lot of work behind it, and there's a very long lead time usually as well. Look, Tassie is really putting itself down and laying down the gauntlet to say, you've got your Sandbelt, you've got your Mornington Peninsula, you've got, other regions. There's Adelaide, there's a couple of, sections in Perth, and we've got courses in Sydney on the New South Wales is, and St Michael sits, and the Australian and the Lakes and all those courses. And, we've got different main golf destinations throughout Australia. You go into Queensland, the southeastern Queensland, the Gold Coast is another golf destination for a lot of people, more resort style courses. But there are these destinations, and Tassie is now getting these modern golf courses built that are unbelievable from the get-go. They don't have age, they don't have history, but they are mind-blowing. And 7 Mile Beach is going to be the next big thing. And to have Arm End, look, it's good to hear that things are happening in twos as well. Take nothing away from Arm End, but I'm talking about 7 Mile Beach, what Matt Goggins done here over the length of time that he's had this focus and this drive behind this project. And I know that Mike Clayton sort of been chatting with him a long time over a number of years as well. To have Clayton DeVries Point involved and now officially engaged, this is going to be something that we all need to stay on top of and just get excited about it. And look, I hope that I can keep you up to date along the way, and we'll all keep following this journey of this golf course along the way too. Something very, very exciting, guys. So 7 Mile Beach Golf Course in Hobart, one to watch and one to keep getting excited about. Now, staying down in Hobart in Tassie, and I mentioned Royal Hobart before. Well, Royal Hobart have been doing a little bit of work on their course just the same. And they've been they've redesigned their seventh green complex. Now that's got a new green and bunkers. And what they've done around the green there is that they've used fescue around the bunkers there. They've used fescue around their bunkers, the new bunker, and they've used a fescue blend on their fairways and surrounds. And on the green itself is pure distinction bent grass. There's that pure distinction again. You might remember in podcast episodes, a number of episodes ago, I've mentioned pure distinction on a number of courses doing work around Australia. And pure distinction's the latest bent grass variety. And here it is yet again on some new work being done, this time in Royal Hobart. So it doesn't seem to matter whereabouts it is in the southern reaches of Australia, anywhere sort of south of Sydney and south, to be honest, and probably even a little bit further north. But Sydney, Melbourne, Tassie, South Australia, it doesn't matter. Pure distinction seems to be the grass of choice when it comes to doing work on golf greens and putting down new surfaces. And like I said, Royal Hobart have got it. So pure distinction, fescues around the bunker, on their fairways and surrounds and everything. So look, Royal Hobart, obviously very good track, very good quality golf course. And it's doing some work, and they're putting the best down on the surfaces there just the same. So good stuff by Royal Hobart. Now we're going to move to South Australia into Adelaide, and we go to Glenelg Golf Club. Now Glenelg have been busy doing a little bit of work again on the golf course, and this time of the year is really it's a tough time of the year to do a lot of work. So it's good to see courses doing some things, because usually it's about managing and dealing with summertime in a lot of golf courses. So to be doing any work is a positive. So I'm just, as always, just highlighting what's happening. So at Glenelg in Adelaide, they've been reshaping their greenside bunker on the 16th. Now they've done a little bit of work around the shape of the bunker itself and just rebuilding that bunker. Some new turf going down around it. And with that, they've also done some improvements to the turf at the walk-off area to the right-hand side of the green as well. So where they get a bit of traffic, they've ripped that up, put down some new surface too, just the same. So around the 16th, there's an area of a bit of wear and concern. It was starting to age and even decay a little bit. And in these courses, that whether they're the Royal Hobarts and the Glenelg, when they have these areas that just start to turn off and start to cause a few problems with quality, they're able to, with their labour force, and they've obviously got a little bit of money behind them, so they can get in there and get the job done when it needs to be done. They don't need to wait until winter, which a lot of the public access courses will often do. When things start to slow down, they get a bit more time on their hands. At the top end of the golf courses, like these ones that I've mentioned, they can get in there and do them a little bit quicker than normal, which is good to see. So Glenelg, there's always things to do on a golf course, and Glenelg is ticking off a few areas that they've identified that need to be repaired. Now we're going to go up to Queensland, into Caloundra Golf Club. And in the past week, and I've mentioned this in my last podcast, in the La Nina year that we're having, we're seeing lots of rain events and lots of storm events, storm fronts and so on. Caloundra was absolutely flogged by storms, with an insane number of trees brought down on their golf course just a couple of weeks ago, with the strong winds and the storm winds and everything. It was almost like one of those mini tornadoes you hear about, where it just ravaged the golf course. And I've seen some photos, and there's also some floating around on social media where, honestly, if there's not 30 plus trees that have been brought down in one hit by this particular storm front that went through, I'll be buggered, because they just copped an absolute hiding. So Caloundra is another golf course that's in repair mode after some recent storms, which makes it difficult for, courses are always looking good when you're getting plenty of rainfall. But once you have something like this come through, it causes so much damage. And look, they're going to be cleaning up for quite some time, no doubt. And once you clean up the debris and the fallen trees, then you've got to deal with tree stumps, which are, another headache in themselves, trying to tidy those areas up as well. So Caloundra got a bit of work ahead for them, and disappointingly and frustratingly, they've been in the path of a major storm. On top of that, in Queensland, I'm going to just add in at Charters Towers Golf Club up in central Queensland. I did come across something earlier on in the year that happened there that I wasn't aware of. Their golf course went completely underwater at Charters Towers with some flooding rain. Now, that's something that seldom happens in those parts of central Queensland. And again, I talk about the La Nina system and the La Nina weather patterns that we're having at the moment, and serious rainfall, consistent rainfall in the western reaches away from the coast in central Queensland. And Charters Towers is a township that is known to flood in these situations. And this year was one of those years where they copped it. Consistent rain, channels down through some of the rivers and tributaries through that area of central Queensland. The whole course went underwater, and I've got some images of that, which I'll see if I can get up on my social media pages just so you can see some of it. So that was earlier in the year. Yeah, look, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword in northern Queensland and in the western end of northern Queensland, where it is normally quite dry, but when you wish for rain when you don't get it. And the age-old saying that I've always said is it never rains, but it pours. So something that they're getting over. They've got past the Charters Towers now, but that did happen earlier in the year, guys. Still in Queensland, and there's a bit more news coming out of Cannon Hill Community Links. Now, I've mentioned Cannon Hill. It's the new golf course that's being built up there in Brizzy, and it's Brisbane's new golf course. Now, McMahon's, I think I mentioned in the last podcast, McMahon's with a contractor that has been engaged to build the golf course, and they are smashing the work out. I'm here to tell you. I've seen, again, I'm going to put some images up on social media to show you what they've been doing, but they are really getting stuck into the construction of this course. So McMahon's look like they're going to stick to this time frame as much as possible, even though we're in a wet season, and all things being equal, they're going to hammer through it and get this thing knocked out in, I think it's the 18-month time frame that they've got from start to finish. So I'll get some of these images up again on social media, so have a look. But McMahon's are hammering through Cannon Hill Community Links, and that's the new course up there in Brisbane that they're working on at the moment, which is really good stuff to hear. Still more coming out of Queensland, guys. And I just got a little bit of information from Paul McLean, the superintendent at Sanctuary Cove at the Pines course. Now, they're going through a process at the moment, and I just happened to come across this info of they're rebuilding their green surfaces, or they're rebuilding their greens actually, and putting new surfaces down in the process. So it's out with the old and in with the new, and they're putting down Tiff Eagle couch on their greens. Now, as I've mentioned a number of times in the past, I'm not quite across a lot of the couch grass varieties for green surfaces. I've heard about them all, but I don't know a lot. I've not had a lot of experience in understanding the subtle differences between them in grains and leaf blade sizes and how they manage their disease and pest controls and all that sort of stuff. So Tiff Eagle is one that I've heard of, but obviously at the Pines they've decided, and in the committee, the superintendent and the committee have decided that Tiff Eagle's their grass of choice. So they're going through and they're putting these surfaces down as they tick through the greens being rebuilt. So the Pines is the only Arnold Palmer designed golf course in Australia, and it's got quite a name to it. It's a very, very well-regarded golf course on the Gold Coast, and from memory, it's a members access only and the guest of a member. So it's not an easy one to get on, unlike its neighbour next door under the same complex of the Palms. But the Pines at Sanctuary Cove, that's what they're up to. Like I said, it's one of the more prestigious courses on the Gold Coast, so no doubt these new surfaces will be absolutely impeccable. And that's just a little bit of something that's happening on up there that I think is going under the radar a little bit with that people might not be hearing about. But in 12 months' time, once they've got a little bit of age and these things are starting to settle in, these surfaces, you watch how good they're going to get. So if you get a chance to play the Pines maybe in 2022 when it's all finished, I'm sure you'll absolutely love the surfaces that are going down there. Moving into New South Wales, and we go to Bonnie Doon, a golf course in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. It's a neighbour to the Lakes, the Australian, all those sorts of courses there. You may or may not have heard of Bonnie Doon, but it's not long ago finished stage 4 of the golf course redesign from OCCM, and it's quite a golf course now. I've got to tell you, it's absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. What a golf course for Sydney to really been redesigned and redeveloped to the way that it has been. So it's a real standout for the work that's been done in Sydney. But Bonnie Doon are raising the height. They're doing a little bit of work on course, and they're raising the height of their women's tee on the 13th. Now, the 13th is a little par 3. It's about 100. I think for the ladies, it's 153 metres. Now, this will enable the players to see more of the green surface as you hit across, because it's slightly obscured where you're hitting across some native vegetation just off the end of the teeing area, and it slightly obscures the vision of the green. So the club and the female members of the club decided that it would be better for them to be able to see more of the surface when they're teeing off. And look, I've got to be honest, it's not uncommon. I think in the design, it was built where it was meant to obscure a little bit of the surface of the green. So it's sort of that thing that plays in your mind a little bit. You're not always 100% of just some of those areas that you just can't quite see from where you're teeing off itself, as opposed to sort of walking, a few meters down the end of the tee and just having a peek, or where you're actually hitting it off from where the markers are, just slightly obscured. So when the golf course was redeveloped and redesigned, I think that was one of the parts that they actually tried to do with the 13th, was slightly hide some things. But as time's gone on, and usually it happens, the club's decided that, it doesn't quite work for us the way that we wanted. So they've just decided to adjust it a little bit, and they're raising the tee height itself. And that's okay. Clubs obviously can do what they like once the full design goes in. And there's always tweaks that go on after a design has been installed. Usually there's not a whole lot of stuff, but there's just little tweaks along the way that golf courses like to do just to finish things off a little bit better for their membership. But that's something that's happening at Bonnie Doon. Nothing dramatic, but that's one of the little challenges that they're going on there. And they're also rebuilding their whole car park. I think they've just finished rebuilding the whole car park and resurfacing it all there too. So Bonnie Doon is still doing some finishing touches around the edges after finishing stage 4 of the golf course. And that's what's going on there at the private course of Bonnie Doon. Now, there is a golf course down the southern end of Sydney into sort of the southern suburbs down on your way towards Wollongong, and it's called the Links Shell Cove. Now, I've been a bit of a fan of the way Links Shell Cove has come about. It's been around for a little while, since about 2004 from memory. It's coming of age. It's rebranding itself. It's trying to position itself as something unique and something special. And at the moment, with the course being redesigned a little bit and rejigged, as it were, and they've got a new clubhouse happening now, they're installing a mini golf course. And, what is also called a putt-putt course of times gone by. But although it's sort of a bit more like the former of those titles, a mini golf course these days, these little mini golf courses or putt-putts are really becoming quite sophisticated and less gimmicky and much more golf-like. And I'm a big fan of this stuff. One of my favourites, I've got to be honest, and it's a little bit off track from the Links Shell Cove, but up at Parkwood Village Golf Course on the Gold Coast, they've got what I consider the best mini golf course I've ever played. And I've been going there since they've been redeveloping that golf course itself. And I've been going there for about 6 years now to play golf on their mini golf course. And it is like nothing else. It's so cool. It's not gimmicky. It doesn't have windmills and all that sort of stuff, which are fun in themselves. But this is a mini golf course. So they're good size holes, mini holes. There's lots of challenges, different ways of playing the holes, and they are a hell of a lot of fun. But the Links Shell Cove, is part of their branding and part of their target market, is getting families attracted to the area, trying to introduce lots of different people and demographics to the golf course, which is fantastic. The mini golf course is an addition that they're putting in. So keep an eye on it. And if you're a fan of the Links Shell Cove, you'll have probably already known that it's going in down there. I think it's called Shanks, and it's a great little name for a mini golf course too. So a little bit of a tweak, and I think you start to see a few more of these golf courses putting in mini golf courses in to attract different demographics and younger kids and younger people, and even getting people into the game of golf. A good way of doing it, and a lot of fun. And that's where we're going to finish off Walking the Fairways, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. A little bit of information and or a lot, depending on where you're looking at it from, but the big one being the new golf course at 7 Mile Beach Golf Course coming out of Hobart there with Matt Goggin and Clayton DeVries Pont as the architect. So whole lot of news happening. That's the end of Walking the Fairways. Let's get into the next segment. Ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to say this is the first interview that I have for 2021. It's a brand new year, and we're going to kick it off with our first interview with a person that you may or may not have heard of. He's an author of golf books, and I say that as a broad term because there's a few different types of topics that this author and editor does. And without further ado, let's just get straight into it. Welcome to Paul Daley. How are you, Paul?
Oh, hello, Steve, and thank you for the opportunity, and great to be with you and your listeners.
Thank you very much. Look, I'm very, very excited to have you on, mate. You've got a plethora of work and a really broad golf background and a lot of your writings and that sort of stuff as well, along with being a golfer and living in and around Melbourne, and you're well-travelled and you're well-versed, and there's a lot to you. Let's just give people a bit of a background of who Paul Daley is. And like I said, some people might know you. You've got a publishing company. It's called Full Swing Golf Publishing. How long have you had that for?
Oh, that started around about 1999 to 2000, after a long career in the pharmaceutical industry.
Right.
Yep, so 21 years.
Wow, okay. So, and there's a lot to it. Like I mentioned, there's quite a few things to underneath that banner of Full Swing Golf Publishing. So just give us a couple of the titles people may have heard of or might know your name to those titles, some of the books that you've done.
Yeah, look, it's all started with Links Golf, The Inside Story, and then I kicked onto the Melbourne Sandbelt, a book I did with David Scaletti. That's called The Sandbelt, Melbourne's Golfing Heaven. But I'd always been interested in architecture, so I did Favourite Holes by Design, The Architect's Choice, which was assembling all the world's leading golf architects and asking them about their favourite hole, combined with some of the leading golf writers around the world. And we've got a book of about 70 to 75 favourite holes. So
wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, it seemed to do quite well in the marketplace. And then I got onto the idea of golf architecture, a worldwide perspective, which at the time was going to be a single volume, but ended up at this stage being a 7-volume compilation of essays by architects and leading golf writers, putting out their principles and practices of golf course architecture. And as you know, a golf course is a living, breathing entity, an organism that there's always new work being done or planned on a golf course. So sometimes we get the writers back 10 or 15 years later and redo an essay or update an essay, what has been taking place on that golf course over that period of time.
Yeah, and the golf architecture series, the worldwide perspective, all these volumes, has become a pretty popular thing for any golf architecture nerds or aficionados, a bit like myself. You know, we've heard about the series where everyone wants a piece of it, and it's very well known, quite well abroad.
Yeah, oh, look, thank you. And it's a case of many hands make light work, and I tried to give opportunities from architects from all over the world, not just Australian-based or American-based, but through continental Europe and South Africa and South America and Asian, Japanese, the whole lot. Everybody's welcome, and as long as they've got something interesting to say, and it's about, when you think about architecture, it's a very deep, fathomless ocean.
It is.
It's fathomless, but gee, it's fun trying to get to the bottom.
Oh, absolutely. No
one's ever really got to the bottom of it, and although in this day and age, it's interesting with earth moving equipment and soil technology, greenkeeping knowledge, the lessons learned from the golden age, plus the lessons learned from the modern masters. We're now starting to get to a point where courses, well, maybe can have 16, 17, 18 great holes, really.
Yeah.
Fully unified, and we've seen more of that over the last 20 or 30 years in particular.
Absolutely, mate. And in your list of books, I'll just jump into a couple of notable ones that you've edited and published, and that's Royal Melbourne Golf Club, A History of the Golf Courses and The Evolution of Golf Course Design by Keith Cutton. Now, I actually have both of those books, and it was really interesting to see Full Swing Publishing to be the publisher of those books, because I was like, wow, this is an Australian publishing company, and I didn't know your name attached to that at the time, as it was a number of years ago, and I was really fascinated by that. They're two great books to have published under your banner as well.
Thank you. Yes, Keith and I worked day and night for about 2 years on that.
Wow.
And
that's an extensive book, that one.
I was very impressed by his work. It was his thesis 5 to 7 years ago, and he put it out there, and but it was in a fairly it was an impressive form, but possibly not in a publishable form, because it had been written with a different purpose in mind. But he and his friends really looked at it and said that, this really has got potential, and let's update it, because things go out of date. Then he approached me, and we worked together, and we really had a lot of fun putting it all together. So
unreal. And like I said, to learn all of these books that you've been part of, you've done yourself and had people involved in, is quite fascinating and like I said, quite extensive, which is it's quite remarkable, especially coming from a golf fan, to look into this stuff and I go, oh, another Full Swing. There's another there's Paul Daley as well. It's actually really, really nice to see a lot of continuity as well, and that your experience in all of that says a lot too, which is quite amazing. And okay, so we know about Paul Daley in the golf architecture space, but one of the things that you and I had spoken about, I might mention to people that we've only got to know each other just in the last couple of weeks, because I did want to get a volume of the worldwide perspective that I couldn't get my hands on. So thank you very much for organising and arranging that for me. It's a wonderful addition to my collection. So thank you. But the golf history. So this is quite interesting to me. I didn't realise that you were right into the golf history, and this leads me into
very much so.
your new book that's recently been released. I think it was last year or the year before. Correct me if I'm wrong. Which is Ben Hogan, about Ben Hogan.
That's right, Ben Hogan, the Yardstick of Golfing Greatness. At I think 2017.
Oh, there you go.
Time flies, and I must admit I get the years muddled up too. And sometimes I do one book a year, sometimes two, and. But that was a real thrill, and it had to be. I was going to do a biography. It had to be Hogan. He was my childhood flashback to the mid to late '60s, where I was up in Western Victoria, the son of a bank manager, and at that stage, even though Hogan was terribly in the grips of one of the worst case of yips ever to strike a top golfer, he was still the preeminent ball striker on the PGA Tour. And he was still the one that after the round, the young pros would dispense with their habit of having a beer and go out and watch him practice or play.
And it's a unique swing in a sense. If I think we've all probably seen footage about it. It's a fascinating swing, isn't it? It's really unique.
It's a unique swing. It's probably the most copied swing. And unfortunately, that brings people down because they don't quite have Hogan's athleticism, his will to succeed, and his strength. It was an action that required a lot of strength, extraordinary timing, but also it was an action that changed dramatically over the years, from the early days where he had you might call a Harley Davidson 4-knuckle left-hand grip,
right?
And he had a tremendously upright swing. And he had one of the precursors to, say, what you might call a John Daley overswing, where certainly John Daley didn't invent the long overswing. Hogan was in that mould. And when he collected the ball just right, it went forever, but invariably it would be hooking. And so he had to make modifications. And he later credited Henry Picard as providing him the landmark lesson, the best one he ever had, which took place in 1939, where Picard said to him, look, Hogan, I'm going to give it to you straight. You will never be a golfer until you learn to slice the ball. Right, you've got to get rid of that 4-knuckle grip, weaken it off, and open your stance up, make a few other modifications that I'll give you, and then you might become a golfer. and sure enough, not long after that, for the very first time, Hogan qualified for the PGA Championship, the 1939 PGA, which, as you might know, and your listeners might know, that up until around about 1958 was a match play event, a grueling event. And anyway, so not long after this lesson from Henry Pickard, Hogan tied the medal. So 36-hole qualifying, he tied with a pair of 68s, and then he went on and had a big win in the first round, and unfortunately ran up against a red-hot Paul Runyon, who did him in the second round. But anyway, from that point, he was on his way.
Yeah.
So look, his swing changed dramatically. But in the evolution of Hogan, it probably all started in the 30s. He turned pro in 1930, but he had terrible trouble staying on tour. And of course, on at least 3 or 4 occasions, he was forced off the tour.
Really? Okay, I didn't know that.
Look, he was forced off, and it cost a lot of money to be on tour. Everyone drove right around America. So he got off the tour for a few reasons, either lack of funds, lack of performances, but sometimes he'd be performing well, and then he would make the cut and then would investigate how much money is for grab and to what length do the prizes go down to. Sometimes as the prizes would only go to 12th, 13th or 14th place, there might be 144 in the field. So it was an era where golf pros would actually pick up and move on, even if they made the cut. Not always, but Hogan was known for that kind of thing. So the troubles he had in the 30s, although real, were not quite as bad as historians have made out. Anyway, look, he would always go back home and he'd mop floors, he'd wait on tables. He worked as a car attendant.
Yeah, right.
He had although he didn't have any schooling, he had a mechanical mind, and he was well appreciated as a mechanic on an oil rig. Sorry, an oil well.
Wow.
He worked in a bank.
a man of many talents, obviously, and I suppose that's the practicality behind his personality, and also the way that he could adjust. Like you talked about his swing before, and I'm just thinking about it in a practical sense. That that back then, obviously, there was none of the technology that we have today. We don't have 10 people around the pros telling them what they're doing with their, with their exercise regime or with their flexibility regime or with their swing patterns or with the ball flights and the club heads. And it was very much down to the feel of the professional from some of the historical things that I read. And Hogan was sort of a guy, from what you're talking about, with that practical mind, that he could work out what he had to do to make things happen. And it was just the way that his mind worked.
Yeah. Yes, he's right. He was practical. He could work out what to do. He'd also play more by feel. Later, they accused him of being the mechanical man, but he also said, I played more with feel than you'd ever know. But it was also a time when he was very much into trajectory and ball flight, and he could work out, he was a genius. He could work out what was going on by the ball flight. And he always maintained that the true measure of a golfer was by how he or she could control their trajectory.
Right. That's interesting.
He always said that. And also it was an era when, golf professionals, they'd travel together. They'd what they call barnstorm. The early Hogan used to travel with, guys like Kai Laffoon, Jack Grout, the great Jack Grout, who was Jack Nicklaus's lifetime coach, and some of the others, and they'd help each other out. He'd even travel with Byron Nelson.
Oh, really? Wow.
His lifetime rival, along with Sam Snead. And so look, Hogan, he just wanted to get the job done, and in between, working the bank or an oil well, he was still looking for jobs as a club professional, and he got 2 jobs. One was at Oakhurst and another one was at Nolan River. And he used to love fleecing big-headed amateurs who felt they could play. And he'd set them up and he'd call them pigeons. And so he did really well. But also during this time in the 30s, where on 3 occasions he was forced to come back off the tour. He developed a reputation in Texas as having the fastest hands in Texas. He was a card shark, an absolute an expert card dealer, and he wasn't proud of it, but he worked in gambling halls, where he unfortunately had to mix with characters of dubious credentials.
No doubt.
And it's where he first acquired the name Hawk Hogan. Now, of course, everyone thought that was because when he gave you the golfer stare, he had that hawk-like appearance. But no, he was just such a fast dealer of cards. Paul Runyon, who was a friend of Hogan's, he later said that when Hogan dealt the cards, his action was blindingly fast. He was just that quick. And Hogan would say to the others across the table, "Put your cards down. I can see what you've got." And so this all fit into Hogan being known as Hawk Hogan well before he became a golf champion.
Wow, that's it. Like I said, hearing you talk about the book, and obviously to get the full sense of it, obviously we buy the book and we would read the whole, history of who Ben Hogan is. But hearing these snippets, you talk about all these other components that make up his life, and it was obviously quite diverse. And in an era back then when you had to do a lot of different things because you couldn't just make a living or money on the tour, and you're often on and off different things. All these little, and this is what, and I've talked about this in podcasts in the past, is that when we dive into personalities, it's really interesting to discover these things we had no idea, because most people know Hogan as one of the greatest golfers there ever was, but we don't know how he came to be that person. And there were all these challenges along the way.
All the makeup, and he was a man who overcame so many odds and challenges along the way. Financial and in every way, being a small man, 137 pounds at his peak, and a little fellow, and he really found a way. And one of the most fortunate things that happened to Hogan was coming in contact with Marvin Leonard.
Right.
Some people might know that Marvin Leonard, he was the he built Colonial Country Club in the late 30s, early 40s, and he brought the US Open to the South. And then years later, he built Ben Hogan Shady Oaks.
Oh, right.
In 1958, he brought in Robert Trent Jones Sr., and Hogan was dead against it. Hogan walked the property and said, "Don't you dare! This is a goat track." But they came to an agreement and made a lot of modifications. Hogan ended up loving it in the end, so Marvin Leonard was really big because back in 1927, when Hogan was a caddy at Glen Garden, Marvin Leonard was a stressed-out grocer.
Oh, and, right.
Worked, as you'd imagine, 8 days a week, and got unwell, went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Look, I'll give it to you straight. Unless you take up golf and, get some fresh air and relaxation, you're really not in for a long life." And so Leonard took to golf, and his habit was to play very early, as early as he could to get away from the crowds. And so who should he bump into but none other than Ben Hogan, Pipsqueak, who was a pipsqueak in those days. And Hogan, he thought that he was onto a good thing with Marvin Leonard, so he didn't want to lose out to the other caddies who are all much older and much bigger. And so Hogan's habit was to, and by the way, at this stage he had a paper run. He had 100 papers each night to sell. But Hogan, he could only sell 98 week after week, year after year. You don't sell 98, and there's a great story to it that the reason he couldn't sell those extra two was because he reserved them for himself in an effort that when he slept at the golf club in a bunker by the caddy yard, he put one of the papers under his backside and the other one over his head, and he'd be there all night. So first light, Marvin Leonard would roll up to Glen Garden, and who would be top of the caddy rank? There might be 50 caddies behind Hogan, and little Pipsqueak would get Marvin Leonard, and that was the start of a great relationship. But You're talking about overcoming odds. Even before then, before he met Leonard, he had to stand up for himself in the caddy yard, and the big guys would institute what Hogan called a kangaroo court, which was his fancy way of saying an initiation ceremony.
Yeah.
Where he'd put the big boys would put you in an oil barrel, put the lid on it, and then roll you down the hill. And
I do have a bit of a chuckle because as soon as I hear these things in a workplace, I do cringe and I go, "Wow, times have changed."
Times have changed. There was no eye health and safety. And if you survive the oil barrel treatment, then it was arranged through the kangaroo court that the biggest, meanest boy would take you on in a fist fight. Anyway, Hogan whipped him hollow.
Wow.
Twice his size. And anyway, the caddy started to take notice of the little pipsqueak and pay him a little bit more respect. So, but he didn't want to leave anything to chance. So he slept out in that bunker with those two papers that he couldn't sell. And the rest is history. And then they formed a lifelong ship, And that brings me to the book because it was through Marvin Leonard's 81-year-old daughter, Martha, that much of the research for the book took place. Marty looked over the manuscript regularly.
Wow.
She gave it the tick of approval and said, which I was really pretty chuffed about, that she said Ben would have really loved the book and you got all the details just right.
What incredible words, and what a really, I'm going to say impressive because I'm standing on the outside, a really impressive and amazing connection to this book, that you've got someone who knew intimately the details of effectively Hogan's life and a wonderful friendship that he had along that early journey and no doubt through his life's journey.
Well, that's so true. And I mean, this Marvin Leonard, he was not only was he Hogan's best friend, but he was his confidant, his financier, hot gospeler. Wow. He set everything up, and as I said before, he built Shady Oaks specifically for Hogan, so he could practice in peace and solitude. There were members, but the members knew better to, there was a respect and a distance, and for that time. From 1958, Hogan was citizen, although he was still on the tour, he was citizen Hogan. He'd play in the club comp, put in his 20 cents or NASA, whatever they call it over there. And he used to love playing money matches against the members. And
just picture, you've sort of painted this picture of a very pragmatic, strong, but unassuming, man who wasn't very large in stature. And I'm just picturing him just walking around in his head going, I can take any of these blokes, whoever they think they are and how good they think they are.
Absolutely.
I'm going to take you on. Let's go. Come on, sunshine. Let's go out there and play for how much cash you got. Let's go for it. And they'd be thinking that they could just absolutely knock him sideways. And not only in the game of golf could he knock them out of the park, but physically he could as well, because he was that strong. He was that strong a person.
He was that strong a person, and he had the strongest mind of anyone out there. So he had the physical and the mental capacities. But also the other thing that perhaps people aren't quite so aware of is that he had a softer side to him. In fact, he lived for dogs. He loved dogs, and he used to give away a lot of charity, and he'd give them to dog homes.
Wow, that's interesting.
He hated the thought of, and it goes back to. It ties in a little bit with, his father's suicide. Chester, his father, who was a blacksmith, who committed suicide at the age when Hogan was 9.
Oh dear! And
it had quite an impact on him in the way he approached things, and there's a lot I could say on it. I probably shouldn't go too far into it because some of it's personal. But
that's fair. That's fair.
He used to give away a lot of money, and he swore, if you ever tell anyone, I'll take the money straight back. And so it didn't come out until many years later. He gave to so many hospitals throughout Texas.
Yeah, wow.
A lot of dog shelters. and even at the club at Shady Oaks, he had his favourite dogs, and he treated the dogs brilliantly at Shady Oaks. And one of them was called Max, another one was called Buster, and they had pride of place on the range.
Wow, what an interesting side.
Yeah, it was an interesting side, and I learnt a lot of that from Marty Leonard. He used to speak about it. But Marty was fantastic for the book. She was the making of the book, and I was going to do the book anyway, but Marty gave it that seal of approval and helped fill in the blanks, and also surrendered many, many photos to me that had never previously been in a golf book.
Wow. So there's a lot more. That was one of my questions I was probably going to ask a little bit later on towards the back end of the conversation, but I'll ask it now. Is that this sounds like it's a very different type of book, and probably in terms of its information about the deep inside parts to Ben Hogan's life, more so than someone sitting on the outside and just researching some of the information that we can find and some of the historical pieces about Hogan. This is really personal information about him that like you said, some of this stuff has never been talked about in that way before. People don't even know some of these things.
No, there's plenty in there along that ilk. I set out to do a 50-50 book, which would be 50% text and 50% photos.
Right.
Rather than short captions. Some of the elongated captions become downright essays. But no, there's a lot there, and we delve into things such as Hogan and Hollywood. He had a love affair with Hollywood, and Hollywood loved Hogan.
Yeah.
The little guy that beat the odds. And so in 1951, there was the Follow the Sun film with guest appearances from Jimmy DeMeritt and Sam Snead and Kerry Middlecoff, and that's just a fantastic film. Some feel it's a little bit on the schmaltzy side, and every film has its critics, but I think it's great. He made another film in 1953 called The Caddy, starring Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis.
Oh wow!
And Hogan plays himself in it, and there's some tremendous interactions between Jerry Lewis and Hogan. Basically, Jerry Lewis is clowning around as you'd expect him to do, but Hogan's giving him the stare and saying, get with the program, mate. And the interaction is incredible. So that's a great film for any of your listeners.
Yeah, most definitely. Anything with Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis is one of a kind, really, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. But we go into other things such as in 1952, the USGA, they said, look, this Hogan, he's not only is he the greatest, but he's going to be around for years. And let's set up a thing called Beat Ben Hogan. So there was a national Beat Ben Hogan Day. and what they were trying to do was bring in 20 or 30,000 weekend warriors from all over America and say, we're going to be 2 or 3 weeks before the US Open, we'll get Ben to go to the US Open course, and he can just play a quick round by himself, and he'll shoot 64, 66, 8, 70, whatever he'll shoot. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, on the Beat Ben Hogan Day, you'll have a monthly medal, a medal round, and if your net beats Hogan, we'll send you a medal. And so anyway, they sent out all these medals across America, and it went for many years. It was called Beat Ben Hogan.
Wow.
That was, a little insight into the stature that he had with the USGA, that the USGA saw how they could capitalise and leverage off the name of Hogan.
Yeah, most definitely. That's I suppose that's probably the early days from the the Tiger Woodses, the Ernie Els, the Rory McIlroys, and you only got to put an ad up with those people, and everyone goes, oh, where can I go and see them, or how can I it's look, I suppose that's marketing and campaigning and all that sort of stuff, and leveraging off what you have on the tour, and like I said, like you mentioned, is that Hogan was one of those people they identified and said, look at the following he's creating. We can use this to our advantage because he's playing on the tour. So, look, lots of stuff keeps coming out about this Ben Hogan in this book of yours, mate. It's really interesting. Now, Paul, I mean, we're jumping around a little bit, and I do want to leave a little bit for our listeners to read the book. I don't really want to go as far as telling them everything that's in the book, because it's so in depth and there's a lot to it, and I'm really intrigued, obviously, to see some of these old photographs, which I do love as well, looking into that sort of stuff. But we've bounced around a bit. I just want to go back to, and I think it's well known that Ben Hogan was involved in an automobile incident, in an accident that he got some pretty serious injuries from. Tell us a little bit about that and what he went through, because from what I understand, is that he was basically told he probably wasn't going to play golf, let alone walk again at some point. Is that right?
That's correct. At certain stages during his recovery, there was the thought of him ever playing golf was beyond. There was, would he live? Now, it's interesting, his injuries took twofold. There was the initial shock where he had smashed pelvis, collarbone, legs, a lot of internal injuries. But being the strong man he was, he actually overcame those in the first 1 or 2 months. But then later, the problem was life-threatening blood clots.
Oh, right.
In regard to pulmonary embolus, and he got very unwell in the phase 2 of his recovery. In fact, as he was getting better, I wouldn't say there was any complacency, but it's not unknown that the clots, anyway, there were big clots there, and they were working their way right up to his heart. And in fact, he got so sick that a priest was called in to administer last rites. Now, it didn't get to that stage. He was, and that never occurred. But he was there on hand. It was quite grave.
Fair dinkum. And this happened in the middle of his golfing career, effectively.
Well, it's spot on. The timing was horrendous. This happened on the 2nd of February, 1949. It was a head-on collision just out of a place called Van Horn in Texas. But look, backtracking slightly, in the month prior to the accident, Hogan had played 4 events. How's this? He won 2. And he lost 2 in a playoff to Jimmy Demerit. So he's coming off a 10-win season in 1948.
Wow. So he's at his peak.
He's at his peak. He's won, he's either come first or second in the first 4 tournaments in 1949. But look, he was dog-tired. He and his wife, Valerie, they bought their dream home. And he and Val, would have discussions, wondering how long, because they travelled together, how long could they keep up this pace, driving everywhere?
Yeah.
Hogan had a mortal fear of flying, so he flew everywhere. He could afford to fly, but he was claustrophobic and he had nightmares. Anyway, so coming off a playoff loss to Jimmy Demerit, he said to Jimmy in the locker room, he said, "That's it, I'm had enough, I'm going to take a break." And then Demerit, quick as a flash, came back and said, "Crikey, Hogan, I beat you once or twice and you throw it in." But anyway, he said, "Look, I'll see you in due course, Jimmy." So he was heading back to Fort Worth, and he had the misfortune to be driving in a pea soup fog. It was the kind of fog where you might do 5 or 10 kilometres an hour or miles per hour, with the lights on, and Hogan's Cadillac is just barely moving. Meanwhile, coming the other way, there was a fellow called Alvin Logan, who was a substitute driver for Greyhound. So Logan was driving this great big Greyhound bus, but in those days, and perhaps today as well, there were very substantial penalties for running late. Deliveries couldn't be late. Passengers had to be on time. And so this Logan fellow was very worried about getting a penalty. And so he's speeding like a madman. He's doing what the authorities later estimated to be about 45 to 50 miles an hour in a pea soup fog. Now, he was impatient. He got stuck behind a truck driver and he did a very stupid thing. He overtook the truck on a bridge. Then all of a sudden, he's on Hogan, and visibility is next to nothing. Hogan sees on his same side. So he overtook. So the guy's on the wrong side of the road and the lights are almost on him. And remember, this is happening in a flash,
Yeah.
much quicker than the time that we're taking to explain it. Hogan cannot swerve out of the way because there's a concrete barrier that prevented it. Hogan's all boxed in, and inevitably he's, like in a flash, there's going to be an accident.
Yeah.
But just before the collision, and this says a lot about him, he threw himself straight over, flung himself, and of course in America they're driving on the right, on the left. So he's flung himself to rightward to cover the body of Val.
Yep.
In an effort to save her life. But interesting, in saving her life, he also saved his own life, that unselfish act, because Hogan's steering column had buried itself into Ben's driving seat. So he would have been impaled. Where Hogan was sitting, he would have been impaled.
Wow.
And if that wouldn't have finished him off, he would have been crushed, because Hogan's engine in his caddy had broke its containment line, so he would have been crushed by the engine that forced its way through the force of the collision. So
My God,
it's quite gruesome, and he was obviously very, very lucky.
Oh, terrific.
To survive. Clubs were found hundreds and hundreds of yards away, and one of the early people to be on the scene recognised it was Hogan in there, so went looking for the clubs and gathered them up. So yeah, it's a pretty gruesome story.
Wow, that's that, and obviously and both he and his wife survived.
Yeah, Valerie got out virtually unscathed, a couple of scratches here and there, but no injuries at all.
Wow.
Logan survived, but for the next 20, 25 years, Hogan and Greyhound were in litigation, and it got pretty nasty, and there were appeals, and it wasn't so much after the money because he was fairly well off, but he wanted his satisfaction.
Yeah, wow, that's quite a story in itself.
Yeah,
let alone the Ben Hogan story. So look, I'm sitting here I'm picturing it, visualizing this accident on a bridge. Back then, big Cadillac, big bus, and all bad things happen. That's just, and you wouldn't think, hearing that story, that not only we know that he survived with a lot of injuries, but I wasn't sure that you were going to say that his wife survived as well. That's quite amazing.
Yep, Valerie survived and lived a long age, well into their 80s.
Quite unbelievable.
Yes. But also, I mean, the collision, if one guy's doing 50 and the other one's doing 10, I'm not a physics major, but I imagine that's quite a force.
Yeah. No doubt. It's I'm still shaking my head. So that was all in the middle of his career, and he recovered through what people told him he wasn't, not only, as you mentioned, not going to survive, but he got back to playing golf. And obviously through his whole career, tell us, I suppose, can you run through and name off overall his career, what things that he won post the accident, for example?
Well, I'll do that, but before I do, I'll mention probably the greatest performance of his life was his comeback 11 months later, at the LA Open in 1950. Remember, this is his first tournament in 11 months. He had the tournament won. He had a very cautious 73 to begin with, and then he peeled off 3 68s and 69s to record a score of 280, which had everyone shaking their head because he was going to win on comeback. But Sam Snead, he ruined the party, and he was not overly sentimental. And he didn't, he was okay about ruining a fairy tale. He birdied five of the last 7 holes to set up a playoff with Hogan. So Hogan was pretty stiff not to win it, but then his legs, he got himself up for this comeback, and then his legs went. The tour and Snead said, "Look, we can't play tomorrow. Let's come back in a week."
Yep.
They did come back in a week, and remarkably, by the 10th, Hogan's exhausted. But even on the 10th hole, it's still only 1 or 2 shots the difference, and then his legs gave out, and then it was all over. Snead ran all over him, had a fairly big, comfortable win. So I think that's probably the greatest performance of his life.
That's absolutely mind-blowing. In under a year, to compete at that level with none other than Sam Snead, I might add.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it's interesting. So I like to think of Hogan's performances pre-accident and post-accident. Pre-accident, he won 3 majors. He won the 46 PGA and the 48 PGA, and he also won the US Open in 1948. But interesting, just the first one was the 46 PGA. Now, can you consider that he turned pro in 1930, so it took him 16 years to win his first major.
Wow.
Contrast that with the likes of Bobby Jones, Walter Hagen, Gary Player, Palmer, Nicklaus, Tiger Woods, even Severiano Ballesteros, who turned pro in 74. He won his first major in 79 at Lytham. So Hogan, pretty patient. Now.
Yeah, very. 16 years back then to be patient enough to get a win.
Yeah, and remember he's leading money winner in 1940, 41, 42, and 46. Wow. So he's the best player in the game. He and Byron Nelson, but he hung in there long enough.
Incredible, quite incredible.
I got off the track there. About his major tournaments.
Yeah.
So he won 3 before the accident, and 6 afterwards.
6 afterwards. That's just, not only did he win that many afterwards, the fact that he won any, I find, again, I say mind-blowing because it's staggering to think, and we know about modern medicine and we know about all this time that modern society's had to work out how to recover from things. And we just went through the accident, and then he goes on to win 6.
Yeah, well, that's right. It's incredible. But Hogan his record was a story of 2 cities. In the 40s, he won the bulk of his 64 PGA Tour wins. But then in the 50s, he won the bulk of his majors and very less of, Remember, because of the accident, on most of the years between 1950 and 1960, he could only play 5, 6, 7 tournaments a year. He was in so much pain. He had to wear stockings. He'd have to get to the course 2 to 3 hours before each round. He had to take medicine, and he had to treat those legs before and after the round. So it was not set up. The days of him playing 20, 25 tournaments, maybe 30, they were long.
Yeah.
And so the reality is that he was the best player in the world before the accident, and after the accident, he became even better. Yeah. And I think that's a staggering achievement.
Like nothing else. Quite remarkable. Quite remarkable.
The 6 majors he won after the accident was the 1950 US Open. And again, this is at Merion, the famous one at Merion.
Yeah.
And that's not long after he didn't play much golf after the playoff where Snead did him in at Riviera in the 1950 LA Open. So he said so this was now the era where Hogan would set his sights, and he would plan, and it'd be like, stalking prey on the Serengeti. He was stalking these majors. He was stalking them. So he set himself for the US Open, and he won it. And he was still not well, and he could barely complete the last round. In fact, there came a point when he said to his caddy, "That's it, I've had enough." And the caddy gave him some choice words, and basically, "I don't caddy for losers." And he barely finished. But so that was a great win. The side of course, the famous 1 or 2 iron. There's a lot of controversy about that shot to the last hole. The one that one of the most famous photographs where he's, from 200 and something out, he hits it on the green 40 feet away, and then 2 putts to get in a playoff with George Fazio and Lloyd Mangrum, the riverboat gambler.
It's characters of a bygone era. It's just the names that you roll out. It's quite extensive, and this part of golf history and in a professional sense is is really fascinating. It's to look back, and it was well before my time, and well before, no doubt, a lot of people's time, but to look back and you hear about these things and then you go and dive into them and you read more, and getting a book like this to unearth it and in a sense relive that time when we weren't around is quite entertaining, is the other part of it. And no doubt that's an element of the book, is the entertainment side of these characters and the story. And it's really interesting, and the book sounds entertaining. I've not read it myself, obviously, and that's what this interview is about, is learning about it. But
look, there's certainly something in the book for everyone, whether it's entertainment or information, statistics, and it's certainly pleasurable for me to put it together. And so, look, leading on from the US Open of 1950, he had a great year in 51 where he repeated his US Open victory, and then he won the Masters for the first time. The 51 is one of his greatest ones because that was the one where he said he brought Oakland Hills, the monster, to its knees. But he took it as a personal challenge against Robert Trent Jones Sr., who was brought in 6 months prior to the US Open to toughen it up. And, really toughen up, which would be code word for the USGA saying make it really tough for Hogan.
That's like saying modern days, make it tough for Tiger. Just make it tough for Hogan, would you? Sort him out.
That's right. Let's see how good he really is. And anyway, so Hogan took it as a personal affront, and he came home in 67. Everyone struggled the first 2 or 3 rounds, but he came home in 67, and in typical fashion, his scores were of a descending nature. And he did that, of course, at Carnoustie in 1953. But so 51 was a big year where he won the US Open and the Masters. Now, just on the Masters, so he's born in 1912. What does that make him? Was he 39? Yeah, 51. He born in 1900. So he's 39. He's the best player in the world, and he's never won the Masters.
Wow.
On two occasions in the 40s, he 3-putted the last hole, not to get in a playoff. So,
wow.
So he had a lot of history with Augusta. So he was pleased to get that monkey off his back. He was relatively winless in 1952, no majors, but 1953 was not only his best year, where he won 3 majors, but some would contend the greatest year ever in golf. Although since then, Tiger Woods and Annika Sorensen have had a few things to say about that. By the way, so in 1953 he won the Masters, the US Open, and the Open Championship at Carnoustie. And the obvious question is, well, why didn't he win the PGA as well to make it a clean sweep? But that's impossible. Now, remember, in 1953, the PGA is it's match play, so you've got to win 7 matches, and Hogan's only playing 5 to 7 tournaments per year, let alone 5 or 7. So it was totally out of the question.
Yeah.
The other reason he couldn't play in the PGA was there was a clash of dates. It was within 2 or 3 weeks of Carnoustie, and travelling back, and he just couldn't fit it in, and he just really didn't have the stamina to go that far. So, of the 3 majors he played in, he won all 3.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible. Absolutely, what a year, and like you said, he's most successful, mate. Look, I want to leave a few things in the book and for people to discover. One of those things is the secret that he's much famed about, that people go, what's the secret? Look, I'm going to leave that a secret. I'd love to. That's nearly a whole conversation in itself, but we'll leave a secret alone. So there's a few more things in the book to discover for our listeners. And I urge everyone to go out there and find this book, and we'll get to that in a second. On a last point, how do you think Ben Hogan will be remembered in basically in a concise way? What do you think that he'll be remembered by as we look back on history?
A few things. I think first and foremost, he'll be remembered as the greatest tournament ball striker the world has known. Now, I would underline the word tournament. Now, there's been tremendous range junkies, but as far as performance in a tournament for consistent ball striking, not just accuracy but shape and being able to move it both ways at will, I think he'd be recalled as the greatest of all time in that regard. You know, he'd be remembered as someone who made practicing fashionable.
Yes.
Of course, the pros that Hogan used to play against often used to warm up in the bar, bending their elbow. I think he'll be remembered as someone who didn't suffer fools gladly. He was happy to keep his own counsel. He didn't go out of his way to make friends. But he was very courteous. He tried to be courteous to everyone, but at times he was accused of being rude and arrogant. But his concentration was so focused on what he was doing, he simply wouldn't hear you. You know,
yeah, he could literally block out and just stay in his zone. He was so focused.
Stay in the zone. And there's the old story about Claude Harmon or someone holing out on the 12th, and Hogan birdied it. And on the 13th tee, he said to him, you know, that's the first time I've birdied that hole. You know, he almost didn't see the hole in one, or he maybe saw it but didn't care to mention it, or just didn't realise. I wouldn't like to speculate. But look, and I think also he'll be remembered for some people as the man that outwitted Robert Trent Jones Sr. at Oakland Hills for that 51, you know, when bringing the monster to its knees.
Yeah, wow.
Oh, there's so many things. You know, little fellow that overcame the odds and overcame the car accident, overcame being small and short.
Such an in-depth character in golfing history, and probably just thinking about it and talking about it out loud, he's without a Ben Hogan, I suppose the golfing landscape would be different.
It'd be totally different, because there's never been a book written since 1957 when he released his the Modern 5 Fundamentals of Golf. Every single book that's come out after that has made reference to it, either or pinched it, plagiarised it, or rebadged it, or given it credit. So it's a book that's hung around. It's the highest selling golf book of all time.
Wow.
It's been reprinted something like 48 times.
Well, that says a lot, doesn't it? That says a lot. Look, Paul, it's been absolutely incredible to discuss not only a little bit about your story and history and golf writing and who you are, and bring that out to my listeners, but this book on Ben Hogan, who I didn't realise was such an in-depth person, such an in-depth character, and his mark on the game is so profound, I think, is probably the only word to describe it. Look, I urge everyone and anyone who's interested in not just Ben Hogan, but golf and golf's history, to get your hands on a copy of this book. It's something different. It's very unique, and it's very in depth with information that, and certainly photographs as well that you mentioned, that's never been brought out before. Ben Hogan, the Yardstick of Golfing Greatness. Where and how can anyone get their hands on this, mate? Tell us.
There's only one way, through me.
Beautiful, even better.
Yeah, no, look, this was a book I didn't want to share with the booksellers and have that profit diminished. So it's only available through me. And it was a leather-bound limited edition of 500 copies only.
Wonderful.
And they can just merely get a copy by texting me.
Yep.
On 0408 195760.
Yep.
That's 0408 195760, or sending me an email, F for Freddie, so fswing, FSWING at bigpond.net.au.
Beautiful. And I'll put that in the show notes as well, so people got that information to get in touch with you. Mate, look, it's quite incredible. What a wonderful chat, to be honest, Paul. I really appreciate your time. It's been enlightening, eye-opening, and entertaining.
Steve, I really appreciate what you with sometime in the future, perhaps when my new book on Severiana Ballesteros is released. Perhaps a story for another day.
Absolutely, mate. Look, it did. The mobile phones aren't perfectly. It did just cut out then a little bit, but look, thank you very much, Paul. And I would absolutely love to catch up with you again and have you back on the podcast, and we can talk about the new book that you're in the process of, and a few other topics and bits and pieces. You've got a wonderful golf mind in Australia, which I love. And mate, look, I really appreciate you taking time out to chat to me on the podcast. So thank you very much for being part of the Golfing Greenkeeper.
All the best, yeah. Cheerio.
Wonderful, Paul.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
And what a way to end my first interview of 2021 with Paul Daley. What a wonderful golf mind, what a wonderful golf person, what a great author Paul is. And I do thank Paul very much for his time with that interview. And look, if that sort of stuff interests you, a bit of golf history and some of the personalities, it's in particular someone like Ben Hogan, look, by all means, get in touch with Paul, and please feel free, if that's what you want to do, and go out there and order that book from him, Ben Hogan, The Yardstick of Golfing Greatness, because it's going to be a great read. He is a great author. I've got a number of his books, and I'm sure you won't be disappointed with a book of that type about Ben Hogan and his history and his story behind becoming one of the greatest players of all time. I know it's certainly something that interests me as well, and it was just great to have a conversation with Paul about it. So I do thank Paul, and I hope you got something out of that interview as well. And if it interests you, like I said, go and grab the book and get in touch with Paul and get it. Look, that's the end of episode 14. For all you guys out there listening, I really appreciate, again, you taking the time to be part of the podcast, and look, feel free to get in touch with me, ask me any questions. Happy to have a chat about things. If you want to get in touch with Paul or anyone else that that I've been speaking to along the way in the podcast, feel free to do so. Please like, share, talk about my podcast as well. I really appreciate you doing so, and by doing that, it gets it further afield so more people can listen to it, and we can keep boosting this podcast further and further along the way. And I'm really thankful for all of that. And as part of all this, I really appreciate the fact that we're heading out to so many spaces in so many countries, and we've got so many listeners happening. So thank you to everyone. And look, that's the end of episode 14. As always, like I say, you hit them clean, we'll keep them green, and I look forward to seeing you at the next podcast, episode 15. Thanks, guys.